Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. I want to ask you a question for those of you who have joined the presentation. How many of you did not know before you got our announcement what an ABLE account was? I am one of those that did not know. And of those of you, so how many of you did know? Because this should equal out. All right. So of those of you that did know, do you know who our speaker is today? You do. And he is the person on this issue. We are so excited to have you here. We appreciate so much you coming all the way down here to speak to us today. There is no one else that knows more about this issue than he does. And this is something that all of us can use, both in representing professional fiduciaries, doing our own estate planning for our clients, and even in potentially dealing with some of our contested cases when we need some tools to use to help set up a situation that's doable for the amount of funds that we're dealing with. Oftentimes those cases are not a huge amount, and yet there's a lot of fighting involved. My most expensive cases are always the cases where they're fighting over the least amount. I don't know why that always correlates like that. So this is another tool for us to have, and it's a vital and important tool, and I know nothing about it. So I'm very excited to have here with us today Dale, Mr. Stephen Dale, sorry. He is, as I said, he is the person on this issue. No one knows more about it than he does. He's going to tell us all about it, walk us through it. Perhaps we'll have time at the end for questions, which is why we wanted to get going, because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions. He is also the trustee of the Golden State Pooled Trust and the author of both Wealth Counsel and Elder Counsel Special Needs Trust. He's worked on several boards of disability organizations, including ARC of California, and he's a frequent speaker on a wide range of topics having to do with planning for persons with disabilities. I want to give him as much time as possible, so please join me in welcoming him here today.
Thank you. Okay, first question, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, let's put this sucker down. Yeah. If I use that, I'm going to hurt you, so be careful. Really wonderful to be here. A little announcement, I am recording this. It's only recording me, so it's not going to record you unless you jump behind me, and I'd prefer you not. Okay, so, and I'm not 100% sure what we'll do with it, but we'll just see. Going through this a little bit, I will cover one of my favorite subjects, which is myself. Here, and we were talking a little bit about boating. By the way, we also own a larger boat than that. But you know, just a little bit about how I got into this. Here, I actually was a psychiatric technician. I was a psychiatric nurse for 17 years. Come from 3 generations of institutional workers. Here, actually never thought I would be an attorney. I worked in a number of institutions and had a pretty bad experience at Napa State Hospital, where I turned in a fellow worker for abuse, which is not a really good career move here. And then I did it a second time, and that was especially not a good career move. And so I decided, what am I going to do? And then I thought, well, maybe I'll go to law school. Seems like something to do here, and did it and got into doing this work as a civil rights attorney to shut down the institutions that had basically my family had worked in for so many years. Now, for folks in mental health, that didn't exactly work out so well. That's not today's subject. For folks with developmental disabilities, it has worked, but I basically was kind of born into the system. And when I, with my family, it was very common that staff would from time to time live on the grounds of the state hospitals. I was shocked when I turned about 5 to find out that not everybody lived at a state hospital. Here didn't work for me and all that, but I've been involved in this. Got involved in special needs trust. We used to get fairly large settlements for our clients. They would immediately lose their public benefits, which meant absolutely nothing to me, because as a nurse or as an attorney, that's not something they taught in law school here. And my directing attorney said I was going to get into one of these special needs trusts here that we need somebody to learn it, and he picked me, probably because maybe I was the weakest on the team. I have no idea. Learned everything I could about it, and found that I really liked it. Now, I don't know about you. When I went to law school, and I just recently shredded my grades because I don't want anybody getting their hands on them, I did not do well in wills, trusts, or taxation. Odd thing. Now I have a master's in tax, and I lecture across the country on taxation of special needs trusts, which is absolutely fascinating. We'll touch a little bit on that. So anyway, we built a practice, and it's kind of, and by the way, part of that is my wife, Terry Dale. If you put your hand up or something here, we basically run this as a partnership. So here, she makes sure that things are in order and that bills go out, which is like modestly important if you want to stay in business. Here, and a lot of what we do is compliance. When I was working, I do a lot of a representation of trustees, and I'm happy. How many professional trustees do we have here? Or do you just keep them in the corner? Is that what you do? You just have to. Okay, well, anyway, I'm really glad to have trustees here. Do we have any other trustees, a corporate trustee, that sort of thing? I had actually looked at becoming a trustee of some of the special needs trusts I worked with, and I decided that that would be an absolutely insane thing to do. But then I was counsel for the Golden State Pool Trust, and we had to replace our trustee, and somebody said, hey, you've got a bar card, and go, yeah, last time I looked, I do. And go, well, you could be the trustee temporarily, and I've been the temporary trustee for, what, about 10 years now? Yeah, so I have 250 beneficiaries who have a lot of time on their hands here. So I will just tell you, for those of you that are attorneys who counsel trustees, it's a lot different being the trustee than being the attorney. I mean, a lot of times we tell the trustees, you got to go take that hill, and they're going, do I really have to? Yes, you do. It's a little different when I'm the one that has to do it, take on that angry mother or whatever. I just will tell you, it does change how you do your planning. I'm not sure I'd recommend it, but that's what we do. So getting back to this, getting back to the ABLE Act, and then here's the last commercial, and then we'll get to the actual subject. As far as the Golden State Pool Trust is concerned, you do have some materials on your table. So we have, something about the Golden State Pool Trust. It's very pretty. It doesn't say very much at all here. But part of what we do at GSPT here is that we require for first-party trust, all folks going into first-party trust be counseled by an independent attorney, okay? And so part of what we do free MCLE classes. We're doing a new series right now. I think we have 10 in the can, and we've got another 5 or 6 coming up. So if this is an area of practice, whether you're an attorney or a fiduciary or whatever, we have online classes. We're adding more all the time. And part of what we're looking at, and I think this is relevant to the subject, is planning for a person with a disability. It's not just a document. There's a thing I call the magic document syndrome here, which is like if you come to the Dale Law Firm and have one of those wealth counsel special needs trusts done, and whether you like them or hate them, they're certainly the largest, right, in the world, if you've ever seen one of these things here. And somehow by having that trust done, my child will be protected for the rest of their life. That is absolutely absurd, okay? It's a document is not going to protect a person with a disability. It's setting up a system. That's what it does. And it really is teamwork. It is working with fiduciaries, it's working with CPAs, it's working with financial advisors, you got the attorneys in there. It is a team sport here. And, part of what we're hoping to do is raise the bar. So oddly enough, we actually provide education to fiduciaries and that kind of thing, because the thing about it is, if you're doing this kind of planning, you need to have as many options as you possibly can, both in your trustees. And I'll tell you, any attorney who does this for any length of time, you're going to come to the conclusion that in most cases, you're better off with a professional trustee than with a family member. There's a lot to doing this, and that's a lot of what we focus on. And there's no single answer for the disability community. That is one universal truth when we're talking about disability. So going through this, a little history of how I got involved in this. The first time I heard about the ABLE Act, what's a good term? It totally pissed me off. Here, it was actually originally designed to wipe the special needs trust attorney off the face of this planet. Much like Oberyn 93 was designed to wipe the elder law attorney off the face of this planet. How's that working, do you think? It's, you know, it's like every time they try to do something like that, it just makes the bar stronger. And part of that, when the first iteration of this came out, you would have been able to put $400,000 or $500,000 into this account. And actually a lot of the folks that were behind this originally had a bad experience with an attorney. Could you imagine that? Okay. As time went on, and the reason that some of the rules we're going to come up with, and I think it's always interesting to understand the history, because then the rules start making sense. The original bill as it came out had a CBO score of like $20 trillion. I have no idea what it was. It was like off the charts here. And so as we start looking at some of these restrictions and you scratch your head about why would you do that, it was all to bring the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office score, down. That's why it was the way it was. Oddly enough, I have found this an incredible adjunct to both my special needs trust practice and for the beneficiaries of the Golden State Pool Trust and the beneficiaries of the fiduciaries that we represent. Okay, so a couple things for those of you that don't do a lot of benefits work. There's this thing called the POMS. Okay, it's the Program Operation Manual System, and I think there is a copy of one of the POMS we're going to go through here. So the way I explain it is, when you call Social Security, does it seem like they're reading a script? They're reading a script, okay? These are directives to what they call the field officers, which are the folks who work at Social Security, about how do you handle a particular situation. Now, if you were to take all the POMs and print them up, they would be about that tall, okay? I mean, there's a lot of them. But a lot of this, when I'm doing my classes and all that, I like to refer back to the POMs. So we're going to go through, and by the way, I'm not going to read the entire POMs to you, but I'm going to go back to this and where the rules come from. And I think if you keep this presentation, it'll answer a lot of questions where if you go, why in the hell is it the way it is? Well, it's because Social Security says this is how it is. So that is the POMs here, and you have an example of that. Okay, so first off, who is eligible for an ABLE account? In fact, I probably should just start off with what is this to begin with, okay? What this is, it's a special kind of account that can hold funds in it, which does not interfere with eligibility for SSI, Medi-Cal, in-home support services, HUD, although HUD is always off the rails here, any of these public benefits. The reason this is important is that for those of you who do eligibility work, in order to be on these programs, you cannot have more than $2,000 in cash. There's a resource limit and an income limit here. And so as far as that's concerned, and that was set, I think, in 1987. So if you had the most conservative cost of living increase for the $2,000 resource rule, that should be somewhere around $18,000, but it has not changed. $2,000 is a ridiculous number. So the problem you would run into is, one, a person on benefits can't have more than that. Secondly, and by the way, I'm a Northern Californian in every sense of the word. Here, I come from a place where we feel that Pelosi is really too conservative here. That being so, when you're working with disability, working is the avenue to people's independence if they can do that. The problem with working is that people would work and they would earn funds. And by the way, another subject is people on benefits can work. Work is good. You know, you're earning money is good. Getting paid is even better here. But the problem is they would work and then they keep going over that $2,000 limit and then they would lose their eligibility for benefits. So one of the things we're going to cover is that this can be used for a whole ton of different things, like, for instance, somebody working and being able to take those excess funds and put them into the account. So anyway, let me go through some basics, and then we'll start going through some application. After I get midway through that, I'm happy to take some questions. If I take the questions now, the answer will almost always be in the next slide. Okay, so let me see if I can plow through this. First off, who is eligible? Okay, now what happened when they came into the last iteration of this thing, they said that nobody could join this unless they were disabled before the age of 26. Totally, there's a lot of speculation I've seen about why. I was actually involved in this. It was to bring the CBO score down, pure and simple, okay? And there's been a push to bring it up, but it's not going to happen in the near future. So in order to do that, you can either do it by being on benefits before the age of 26, either SSI, SSDI, Medi-Cal based on disability, any of those programs. If you've done that, you're done. Like, so for instance, we may talk about her a little bit. We have a niece who, by the way, has an ABLE account here, who has Down syndrome, and you know, I think it's pretty clear she was disabled before the age of 26 here. And so for her, piece of cake. The problem you have is oftentimes you'll have folks with mental health issues where they were definitely disabled before the age of 26, but maybe they didn't start getting their benefits until they were 30 or so, right? And so those folks can also qualify if they have a doctor's certification that in all likelihood that they would have met the definition of disability. And as we go through this, for any of you who do much work in special needs trusts, you cannot be too paranoid with Social Security when it comes to SSI. It is not possible to be too paranoid, okay? And so there's compliance and you know, just all sorts of scrutiny here. This is covered by the IRS, and believe it or not, the Department of Treasury has always been friendly to the disability community. I teach a class from time to time here from some of the law schools I lecture at called Wacky Things the IRS Does When There's a Disabled Person in the Mix. And we'll go through, like, if you presented this kind of situation here in a private letter ruling, what do you think the result would be? And then I go, let's add a disabled person to the mix and see what happens. And they go exactly the opposite. They've always had a history of doing this. I have a suspicion that some of the attorneys maybe have children with disabilities. I don't know what it is. But, you know, it's brilliant that it came under the Department of Treasury, because the level of scrutiny we're dealing with is almost zero. Almost zero. It's amazing. Okay. If the account beneficiary qualifies because of a certification, you can't take that certification and say, give me my SSI, SSDI, or whatever. It's a good program. It's not that good, okay? Other key features. Contributions can be made by any person. As we're going to see later as we go through the POMs, a person doesn't mean what we might think it is. A person means we don't care where the money came from, okay? It could include a special needs trust. Contributions are not tax deductible. Now, California's program, when it's up and running, will have a very slight, personally I think, inconsequential tax deduction for Californians using the California program, and we'll go through that as well. But generally, they're not tax deductible here. Income earned by the accounts are not taxed because, as we're going to see, this is a form of a 529 plan, okay? So the same rules you see with 529 plans, for the most part, are going to be the same rules here. And account withdrawals for qualified expenses are not taxable, okay? Now, for my beneficiaries on SSI, taxes are really not a huge issue. I don't think a lot of my folks are paying a lot of taxes, but they're not taxable. Individuals are limited to one account. And the total amount of contributions is whatever the gift tax exclusion is for that year. Once again, why they pick that number? To bring the CBO score down, okay? Here, so right now it's $15,000. Who knows? You know, I'm sure it's about the time of year they start deciding what next year's will be, but eventually it'll go to 16, 17, whatever, you know. So aggregate contributions cannot be more than whatever that state program's 529 plan is, okay? And as we're going to see, you can open up an ABLE account in any state that allows Californians to join, and most do. There's 6 that don't want us, but that's okay. Here, it's a big country here, and all that. So it's whatever that state's program 529 account could possibly be. So in California, the most you could put in a normal 529 plan is $475,000. Okay. Now, at $15,000 a year, not counting that maybe it's going to make some money, that would take 31.6 years. I've got a sneaky suspicion I will never see a maxed out ABLE account. And as we're going to see, as estate planners, most of the things we use this for are like money in, money out. We really don't use them a lot for saving, but that's the most you could do it with. So the way this works, it's actually 2-tiered, and this gets confused all the time. As long as the account is below $100,000, and if the beneficiary is on SSI, they get to keep their SSI. When it goes over $100,000, then the SSI goes into suspension. You don't have to reapply. Believe me, when I'm talking to families, I always ask them, how many people have helped their children get on SSI? I'll get a whole room full. How many people would like to do it twice? And go, I've never had hands go out. Here, go. You don't, as long as you follow the rules, you don't have to reapply. So if it was if it went to like $102,000, you would go into suspension. Then if you spent it down, it would go back into SSI. Now here's the thing, and by the way, for those of you that give that lovely lady a business card here, I'll send you some links that are going to help you digest this, unless you're like me that lives and breathes this stuff here on like the basics of benefits and that sort of thing. The thing about it is, especially if you have somebody with a developmental disability or somebody where their disability began before the age of 22, here, in all likelihood, when the parent retires or dies, they're not going to be on SSI. They're going to be on a program called Childhood Disability benefits. So it may not actually make any difference. If the account goes over $100,000, then you still get to keep your Medicaid or your Medi-Cal until it hits whatever the highest rate is for that state, right? For California, if you join the CalABLE program, which is supposed to be up and running the end of the year, we'll see here, then it would be $475,000. Every state has a different number. Actually, to me, it's irrelevant. Okay, ABLE account beneficiaries do not lose their Medi-Cal here if the SSI goes into suspension. And so, for instance, this is just an example. The Arizona plan, if you use the Arizona plan, the most you can put in that is $412,000, right? Every state has a different amount here. So in that case, if you went over $100,000 and you use the Arizona ABLE program, your SSI would go in suspension, assuming you're on SSI, and you keep your Medi-Cal. You know, a lot of what we do as trustees and planners and care, do we have a care manager in the room? God, you guys need to advise some care managers here. Anyway, a lot of what we work on is not just keeping people on benefits, but actually looking at the value of the benefits. You know, there are some times where losing the benefits isn't really that big a thing. You know, there's some folks where like losing their SSI or Medi-Cal is not a big thing. If they're using their Medi-Cal for in-home support services or attendant care, losing the Medi-Cal could be devastating, or if there isn't some other way to provide for them. I mean, you have to use a little common sense. Preserving benefits just for the sake of doing that is just silly. On the other hand, for some of the beneficiaries we work with, keeping their benefits is absolutely essential. For some folks, it's actually a nuisance, and you do have to you know, deal with that. As far as investments go, and this is exactly the same as a 529 plan, you can only change the investments twice a year. So if you have somebody who wants to day trade with these things, this is not the way to go. Now, Terry and I set up a 529 plan for our grandchildren many years ago. By the way, one of which, and we can talk about this later, is on the spectrum. Wasn't when we got started. How many times have we changed the investments? Or maybe we need a financial advisor. Anyway, by the way, it's done quite well. So as with the normal 529 plan, there's a range of investment options. So like I get this question, when is Wells Fargo going to have an ABLE program? And the answer is never. And for some, maybe that's a good thing, maybe not. Although I do represent Wells Fargo here. It's not you're not going to have banks having their own plans or whatever. California will be TIA CREF who's doing it. So as far as an investment vehicle, you'll be limited to whatever that program has. Contributions are in after-tax dollars, but earnings grow tax-free, just like a normal 529 plan. Withdrawals have to be for qualified expenses, or else the earnings would be subject to a regular income tax and a 10% penalty. Now, this is something that's changed. So, and the ABLE Act is something that is in constant evolution. Originally, they limited what you could use it for. Why? To bring the CBO score down. And so everything except for that was on the list. Now, one of the most fascinating things is, and I'm not sure how this happened, is legal fees are included. So thank you very much. That was a big surprise. So anyway, that works for me. But it had all these different things, and there were a lot of questions about, could you use money for this, or could you use money for that out of an ABLE account? And there was some dictum that came out of a publication that from the IRS, basically about what are qualified disability expenses, and they said, well, ABLE accounts are for basic living expenses, which include. Well, somebody picked up on that and says, well, we're just going to add basic living expenses on it. And when somebody called the IRS on that, the IRS said, works for me. We're the IRS. We're not Social Security here. And so what is a basic living expense? Now, a lot of us have been trying to figure that out. The things that seem to be pretty clear is you can't use it for gifts, and you can't use it for gambling. That seems to be where we're at. One of the questions that's come up, can you use it for marijuana, or as we call it in Northern California, medicine here? And apparently you can. So we'll just see. And if we get into our scenarios, all the scenarios are real life cases. We have been using it for somebody so they can get their medicine. Okay, so what is a qualified? And the other thing is, if the beneficiary were audited, and I am recording this, now we should not counsel people. They should not follow the rules, although why you would, I have absolutely no idea, unless you're in front of the Ventura County Court, and that's probably a different thing. Here is, in order to get penalized, the beneficiary would have to be audited by the IRS, by an agent who understands this stuff. And so what are the odds of that? And it's greater than 0. And as we get into this, the fact that this is about as loosey-goosey as you can get, we can actually use that for our benefit. Where can you open up an ABLE account? I hear this every week. When are ABLE accounts coming to California? They've been here since 2016. June of 2016 here. Now the California program, and we are California, so we're going to have some pride here. California's program should be opened up by the end of the year. They're working really hard to get it up and running. And personally, the fact that it's taking a hell of a long time, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because they're learning from the other programs, and I'm sure we're going to have a very good program. I myself, I don't have it up here. I've been using the Ohio program. And we'll talk about, if you start using it now, if you want to go to CalABLE, how you do this. For those of you have something on your table, and this is from the Ohio program here called STABLE. They're not really good at naming things. That's the State Treasurer's ABLE program. You'd think they'd come up with something better, but that's what they came up with. Here, and that's actually been a very good program to work with. We'll cover later in the presentation, what if you just really want to have a California program? You could actually open it up and move it. It's when California's is up and running. I'd give them 3 to 6 months to work out the bugs, but we'll see how it goes. So right now, there originally was that you had to open it up in the state that you lived in, and there was a race for all these states to get these things in place. And then at the last minute, they changed the rules and says, well, we didn't really mean that. You can use another state's program if they allow it. Here, you can only have one account. So you can't open up like a 529 plan. You could open up 529 plans all over the place. This you cannot do here. As far as the states, and the minute you put this together, it's out of date. There are 36 plus states, of which there are, I think, 12 states that only serve their own citizens here. But there's many options out there. Okay, so one of the unique things about an ABLE account is it has a Medicaid or lien payback. They like to call it clawback, just to keep us confused. So what it basically says in the law is, in the event that the qualified beneficiary dies with remaining assets in the ABLE account, the assets in the account first have to be distributed to any state Medicaid plan that provided medical assistance. Now, California, as loose as we are, our Medicaid department they count everything as a medical expense with the most bizarre thinking behind it. And, I mean, we have had one we were doing a lot of fighting with about somebody that was in a group home and go, well, that's not a medical expense. And their argument was, if they weren't in the group home, they'd be in a nursing home. Go, no, they wouldn't. They'd be out on the streets like everybody else here. That being so, that's their position. So here, the amount is after the creation of the ABLE account. Okay, and we're going to show the difference in a minute. Now, where does this come from? And the slides that are in the blue come straight out of the palms. Okay, and most of them will have the actual sites. So how did this happen? And this was actually a mistake. I became very close to the fellow who wrote this thing, and he's made it really clear. Their intention was there was going to be a lien. It was going to be collected on. There was going to be no way to weasel out of it. But unfortunately, oftentimes when they write these benefit laws, I don't think we get the best drafters or drafters. He actually had never had experience with public benefits. So you get a lot of strange things that happen that will create these holes. So what it actually said is, if the state files a claim, Pennsylvania said, I got an idea. We just won't file a claim, and therefore we could just eliminate the clawback for Pennsylvania. Well, right now, and I like I told you, it'll say 3 states. There's actually now 6 states that have engaged this, including California, that just said we're not gonna make a claim for Californians who use the California program, right? So for some folks, the lien may be a big deal. For some folks, it's just really not that big a deal. So there were 3 when I wrote this. There's 6 now. It's just growing. If the beneficiary moves to another state and uses Medi-Cal, so for instance, a Californian using the Pennsylvania program, that's not going to work because it would only help with Medi-Cal or Medicaid you used in Pennsylvania. So that's not going to help in California. And the other thing is, if somebody moves from state to state, they may be using Medicaid in different states here. But what I'm going to show you is easy ways to work around it. For your specific state, check with your program. Now, when it comes to liens, and when we do work in this area, keeping track of the liens is something you always want to keep an eye on. As we should know, there was a change because of CANR, California Association of Nursing Home Reform. And if you're watching this, Pat, see, I'm giving you credit for this, is that the law changed that says our normal Medi-Cal recovery is for any Medi-Cal used after age 55 that goes through probate. Anybody in this room know how to avoid probate, right? I mean, that makes a living trust a Medicaid planning tool overnight. It's just amazing, right? I mean, it's there's not a lot to it. With an ABLE account outside of California, it's going to be any Medi-Cal used from the time the account was set up. Although if you use the CalABLE program, and as I'm going to show you, even if you switch to CalABLE the day before you pass away, it's a CalABLE program and there would be no lien, okay? For a third-party special needs trust or normal estate or estate planning special needs trust, here, there is no lien because the beneficiary never owned it, right? And I'll tell you, for my planning even today, I usually prefer using third-party trust, not just for the liens, but there's a lot of reasons for doing it. And for a first-party trust, whether it's a pool trust or a special needs trust, there's a lien for any Medi-Cal you've used during your lifetime. Okay, so here's the thing, just that if you were to set up an account, let's say in Ohio, okay, and then you decided later, or the family decided later, that they'd really like to move it to California because they don't want to deal with the lien, what the rules actually say is that if you move it, you make a transfer, there's no cost for the transfer either, then what happens is it closes that account and opens up a brand new account and you start from fresh. I was always concerned that if you started in Ohio, you had tainted that money and somehow they would always have a lien on it. Anyway, the rules say, no, that's not how it works. So it closes and there you go. This is a big issue. And I will want to tell you, as estate planners, a lot of the presentations I've heard from ABLE programs kind of space this out. Now, part of this, to keep this in mind, the disability community is a very broad community, okay? So it's like my friend says, Brian Rubin, if you've met one person with autism, you have met one person with autism. It'd be a lot easier if they're all the same. It just doesn't fly that way. So, you know, there's all sorts of folks with disabilities that are fully capable of managing things. I tend to work with people that do have capacity issues. And so this is something that I usually just don't hear from the normal ABLE program. But as estate planners, it's something we certainly deal with. And as private fiduciaries, it's something we deal with in spades. So basically, who can set this up here and who owns it? So this is an important concept, especially as we start getting to the sizzle coming up here, is that the eligible individual is the owner of the ABLE account. This is going to be really important when we come up. So like we came very close to being the first Californians, my wife and I, to open up an ABLE account for my niece who's in New York here. And she has Down syndrome, she's on SSI, and all of that. In this case, as we're going to see, she's not the one managing it, but the thing that comes up is who owns the account. Now, when we start talking about that, is our niece competent? Yeah, I mean, does she express her opinions? There's times I wish she wouldn't, but she does, you know, and she certainly, if you put information in front of her, here, she's more than capable. In fact, you can't stop her from, you know, expressing her wishes and all that. So she's definitely not incompetent. Would we want to give her $15,000 that she could get her hands on? Absolutely not. Okay, I mean, just her skill is not managing money, and the fear would be that she would get taken advantage of. A lot of the folks we deal with, that's going to be an issue as well here. So with that, the term they use here is the person with signature authority. So the person who can create the account and the person that can manage the account is the person with signature authority. So those are, and having signature authority. So in our niece's situation, the person with signature authority, and as you're going to see, we have authority for this, is her mother, which just makes sense, even though the account belongs to Erica. Now, the folks who can set up the account or the folks that can manage the account are either the person with the disability, a parent, legal guardian, either that or a parent or a legal guardian of the designated beneficiary, or somebody named under a power of attorney. That's it, okay? So for instance, the reason I wasn't the first Californian is I'm just the uncle, right? And it took a while to get somebody who was authorized to do this. So we probably are the 10th ABLE account in California here. I would love to have the bragging rights to be the first, but we're amongst the first. So you go back to this. A parent could set this up, and let's say it's for a child that's like 16. Okay, well, obviously they can't manage it because they're a minor here. But if there is a concern, when the minor turns of age, 18 in California, unless they're incompetent, they have a right to that account. And sometimes when you're working with families, you want to really make that clear, because it may be that that's just like a non-starter as we go. through this. Unless the able beneficiary lacks capacity, they have first priority to manage the account. So let me illustrate it this way. And sorry, because I have a fascination with cartoon characters. So anyway, Fred and Wilma have a daughter named Pebbles who was born with severe developmental disabilities. Fred and Wilma establish an ABLE account under their authority as the parents. Easy enough to do. Pebbles lacks capacity to manage her account or to execute a power of attorney. Fred and Wilma maintain signature authority over the account as the parents. So far, so good. Fred and Wilma pass away in a tragic accident, and their neighbors and best friends, Barney and Betty, step in to take care of Pebbles. Very nice. Okay, in order for Barney and Betty to assume signature authority, they would either have to become Pebbles' guardian or conservator, or maybe adopter, okay? But see, the issue that comes up is that, you know, when you're counseling families and working on is, you know, if you're looking at using this as a savings tool, which very few of my families are, they're using it for something completely different. Here is you need to really think this through, because the problem with this, and we go back to Erica, she is conservatable, okay? I mean, but the family has made a decision that they don't want to conserve her, which I'm absolutely on board. Well, the problem would be that if there was a large amount of money in that account, let's say mom passed away and dad has already passed away, then the only way to get in that account would be to conserve her, right? See the issue? And these are the kind of issues that we as planners bring our experience to the table and, you know, hopefully add something to this new tool. If the eligible individual has capacity, then the first thing you should do is have them sign a power of attorney. Almost all the programs have a sample power of attorney you can download, or you can take that language and add it to another power of attorney that you've done. If the eligible individual wants to have their sibling, or maybe their very friendly trustee here have it, because their very friendly trustee says, unless you make me the agent, I'm not going to put money in it here. Then you do it through a power of attorney. We call it coercion. Okay, so in determining whether an ABLE account is right for your loved one, if the ABLE beneficiary has capacity, have them sign a damn power of attorney and be done with it. Okay, if the designated beneficiary lacks capacity, you need to think this through, right? Because once again, I don't think that a lot of parents that are involved in this are thinking it through, and I think this is something you just need to bring up. Making contributions. Now, and I have this in here for a reason. As I had told you, we had the slide that says contributions, they can come from anywhere. It's supposed to come from a person. That seems not to mean much of anything. It could come from an annuity. It could come from, as far as we can tell, it could come from a structured settlement. You could conceivably create a structured settlement that maybe spits out $15,000 a year irrevocably assigned to the trust. It could come, but it also could come from a trust. A lot of the questions we had with Social Security, and they resisted this for some time. I happen to be on a committee where we actually work with Social Security for the most part here, and our question kept coming up: can a special needs trust make a contribution to an ABLE account, and what does that look like? What are the rules? And as we're going to see, they've made it really easy. It is really clear that a special needs trust can make a contribution to a special needs, to an ABLE account, although we still have our limit right now of $15,000 a year. Now, part of this is there's only so much paper I wanted you to take home. There is another POMS that's cited here that went even further, because there was the new trust POMS that came out that went even further and just basically spelled out that a special needs trust, whether it's a self-settled trust or a third-party trust, and all that, can make contributions into an ABLE account. And at that point, even though it's out of the trust, that's still an absolutely valid thing to do. And then what happens with that is the ABLE account is no longer scrutinized at all by Social Security. It's under the Department of Treasury, who quite frankly could give a darn about what happens to that account. They have a history of doing that. So as far as first-party contributions, here, income received by the beneficiary and deposited in his or her ABLE account is income to the designated beneficiary. And so this is, this is straight out of the regs. That is, the income is income in the first instance, but the contribution is not income. And it's going to give us an example. So an individual cannot use direct deposit to avoid income counting unless, for instance, it's irrevocably assigned and it's assignable. So when, anyway, so the examples would be here, if a payment that belongs or is due to the designated beneficiary, it's something the beneficiary had a right to. So transfers from a special needs trust to the ABLE account, they didn't have a right to that. I'm the trustee, I put it in the account, so that's not income to them. But let's say, for instance, they work, they get a job and they work, and there's a whole way of counting that income here and a reduction in benefits. You can't just directly deposit it in the ABLE account and not count it as income. It's still income, okay? Or I have another case where there's an annuity that it is designated directly to the beneficiary, and the beneficiary has a right to it, and there's no way to irrevocably assign it. There's, you know, they could receive it, count it as income, but they still, when they put it in the ABLE account here, that's put it in the ABLE account, it's still not going to make it not income. It's counted as income to the designated beneficiary as it otherwise would be. The designated beneficiary is considered the contributor for the ABLE account, and the ABLE contribution is not considered income to the designated beneficiary. It's not worded really well, but here's the concept. If they have a right to it and it's income, it's income. If they contribute it to the ABLE account, then it won't be part of their $2,000 resources and all of that, but you can't just direct money into the ABLE account and call it not income unless you can irrevocably assign it. So examples of payments are things like wages, benefit payments. So a lot of folks will be on SSI and SSDI. You can't just designate your SSDI in your ABLE account and not count it. It doesn't work like that. Mandatory support payments. We don't know why that's in there. And that didn't make a heck of a lot of sense to me. If we get to the last scenario, and even if we don't, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can irrevocably assign child support to a special needs trust. That clearly is okay. You just can't directly put it into an ABLE account. Now, you could take it, irrevocably assign it to a special needs trust, and then have the special needs trust pay the ABLE account. That's okay. So I don't get it. Okay, anyway, what are the beneficiaries not on SSI, but they're getting Medicaid or Medi-Cal? Okay, and oftentimes that's the most important program that they're on. So there is a CMS memo that I've cited here that just basically says, and I'll just go through these 3 slides real fast, which says that with a trust, you can transfer money from a special needs trust, whether it's a self-settled trust or a third-party trust, into an ABLE account. That's okay, and that's fine. Okay, so that's what's important to us. This is one of the big things that comes up with these ABLE accounts. Now, how many of you, how many of you are modestly fluent in benefit issues? Is probably a hand. Or like, I mean, you at least know what they are. They have resources and things like that. Yeah, okay. Okay, one of the most perplexing things for families when they get their kid on SSI is that if the SSI recipient with the whole $910.72 a month that they get are not able to pay fair market rent for their housing, whether they live in their parents' house or they rent a place, and if they get assistance, whether it's from parents or a trust or whatever, their benefits are reduced dollar for dollar for the assistance they get, capped at $270. Now, a lot of families go, what the hell? Here, because and it's always the same thing. So, like, now, are there a lot of places you could live in this area for $972 a month, especially if you kind of like food on top of that? I mean, in my area, if there is such a place, I wouldn't want to live there here. So we're almost, I mean, the biggest issue we deal with is housing. I mean, disabled or not. I mean, our sons are the same thing here. So, and they're technically not disabled here, but the concept basically is if they're getting assistance with food and shelter, and we'll go through what is food and shelter, their benefits are reduced dollar for dollar, capped at $270. For those of you that give Terry a card, I will make sure you get a link to a video on housing They're nice and short, and after you watch it for about 3 times, it'll probably make some sense to you. Okay, so here's the thing about it, and going back to the palms, let me just put the whole thing up. Here's what it says, and this is kind of where the sizzle comes up. What it says is, do not count able account distributions here as income, whether it's used for a qualified disability expense, a non-qualified expense, a housing expense, just don't count it, okay? Cool here. So like, so how could we exploit that? Because that's what we do as attorneys, is we take these things and find a way to exploit it, okay? Now, when you come to housing expenses real quick, these are the 9 things they count, right? Mortgage payments, rent, electricity, gas, you know, that kind of thing, right? Here, those are the housing expenses, pretty basic stuff. So let me give you an example about how this flies, and then let's expand what that's telling us. Belinda's been disabled from birth and receives $910.72 a month in SSI. She's a beneficiary of a self-settled special needs trust, because I said so. Okay, and then she would like to move to a nicer apartment, which would cost $1,000 a month. I'm not sure where that place would be, but you know, and by the way, you hear all the time, you cannot use a special needs trust for housing. What is it they need? They need housing, right? And you know, the 20th is rent check day at GSBT. I get a stack like that, and it's just sign all those rent checks and out they go here. And those are the folks we haven't put on able accounts. So we go back to this. She wants to live in a nicer apartment, which would be $1,000 a month. Now it'd be kind of hard to do that on $972 or $910.72 here. And on top of that, she probably likes to eat. Okay, so she's going to need some assistance to move in. So if Bob, her trustee, were to give her $1,000 a month directly, that's not going to work because that's unearned income, and that's just going to wipe out the SSI. That would be bad. If Bob were to pay the landlord directly, which is what we normally do, she would take that $270 reduction. Now, it's not a bad bargain because at least she's in a better place than what she would have afforded otherwise. But, you know, did I mention I own a sailboat? I mean, this is like $3,000 a year. Now, I could blow $3,000 in a weekend, no problem, right? I mean, it's not, but you know, for Belinda, $3,000, that is a ton of money. That's going to make a big difference to her. So, and I don't, okay. So if instead Bob were to contribute $1,000 a month into her CalABLE account, and in turn the funds from the account were to pay the landlord, then there would be no reduction in the SSI. This is huge, okay? And I have had parent after parent after parent doing this. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever dealt with Social Security. It always goes the same way. They go down and say, I opened up one of these able accounts. I'm doing exactly what it says for Belinda here. We give them a copy of the POMs and all that. They're told by the field officers, no, you can't do that. And they'll deny it at first, and then it takes about 2 or 3 months to work it through and go, oh my God, yes, you can. Here, and it actually does work. Why does it work? Because I took the money in the trust, I put it in the CalABLE account or the stable account or whatever you want to have, a label account for Florida, I don't know what it is here. I put in the account. I turned the money I'm managing into her money. Now she is paying her own rent with her own money, no reduction in benefits. That's why it works. And by the way, when this first came up, a woman named Mariel Byrne and I got a chance to talk to the folks who make the rules, and we kind of made the case that this is the result we should get. And lo and behold, when the regs came out, they actually listened, and this is what they did. Okay, here's another example. For those of you who do work in special needs trusts, housing is always the #1 issue, always. After that is attendant care, and third is Disneyland. Okay, that is the order of importance. Okay, is that true? Absolutely. And even if it isn't, you should say it is. Okay, anyway, Sue Casa wants to provide for her daughter, Mia, with a home to live in. This is very common because there is so little housing for folks with disabilities. A lot of the families we have with means are buying condos, trailers, houses, whatever. This is a very common scenario here. And if you go to some of my videos, a lot of them really focus on housing. Sue is concerned that if she puts the property in Mia's name, it could be subject to a lien. Now, this was written before Pat McGinnis got that law passed, so you could put it in just a regular old living trust, and that would be fine. I still prefer not to do that for a number of reasons. Additionally, if Mia were someday unable to live in the home and she sold it, it could interfere with her benefits eligibility. And that would be part of the concern is, even without the lien, it's very common that people move. You know, maybe it just doesn't work any longer or that kind of thing. So if she owns a house and sells it, what are we going to do with the proceeds, right? So that's why we always put it in a third-party trust. Sue is able to purchase the home, and rather than give the title to Mia, she titles the property into a third-party special needs trust. Okay, here's what the regs say. And by the way, if you ever want to look these up, if you Google whatever that POB site is, SIO1120.200, odds are my website will come up first, and secondly after that will be the Social Security Administration POBs. That's the easiest way to find these things, and it'll pop right up. And that's what it, and these are straight from it. So what the Program Operation Manual system says is if the trustee of a special needs trust holds title to a house as a home for the beneficiary, the house would not be a resource to the beneficiary. That makes sense. It would also not be a resource if the beneficiary moved from the house. So thank you very much, Social Security, for making my point. Okay. The trust holds legal title to the house. Therefore, the eligible individual would be considered to be living in his or her own home on having an equitable ownership under the trust. I have never understood where they came up with this. And in fact, I see some people puzzled out there. I don't understand where they came up with this. It's an irrevocable trust where I have total control. I can do with it as I please, you know, with some rules. But this works for me. It's good. It says even though she doesn't own it, she owns it. And that has a value. We're going to get into why. So an eligible individual doesn't have in-kind support and maintenance if they're living in the house. What we used to do in these situations is we would have the trust own the house, then we would try to charge fair market rent back to the beneficiary, put the money back in the trust, and we just had money going all over the place, and it really never worked here. Although, you know, it's a lot of things in estate planning. If you get enough moving parts, maybe you can confuse them and get the results you want, right? And but what this is saying is we don't have to charge her rent any longer. So so anyway, because she has an equitable interest, she does not get rent-free shelter. Now, if the trust pays other expenses, then we're going to have a problem because there's going to be taxes on it, there's going to be utilities, there's going to be, you know, all the things that are involved in owning a home. So Mia can live in the house without having to pay rent. She is going to have a difficult time paying the taxes and utilities without some sort of assistance. Sue transfers enough money in Mia's ABLE account, either monthly or annually, to pay the taxes and utilities with no reduction in benefits. There's a couple of things I want to show you here. One is we're not just piling up a lot of money into the ABLE account. Most of the scenarios that we're actually doing in real life is money in, money out, you know, and so it's not building up. Sue also transfers enough money in a third-party special needs trust for Mia to continue contributions here to the ABLE account in the event that she passes away or loses capacity, okay? And that's one of the things that a special needs trust can do. So both Sue and Mia feel much more secure and feel that Mia has the best of both worlds. Sue has provided a residence, and I'll tell you, providing that residence is a, you know, what half of the game for these folks is if you can get them into a solid, safe living situation, that is half of the game right there, okay? Having these tenuous things where they're constantly moving and living in these places I wouldn't want to have a pet in, it's not a healthy environment, okay? If Mia were to be sued, the assets in the special needs trust are protected. A special needs trust is just a glorified spendthrift trust. That's all it is, okay? And for you guys that are tax weenies out there, when we do classes about taxation of these trusts, what I try to teach you to is just forget about the whole special needs trust thing. It's a revocable spendthrift trust that gets an extra tax deduction. So, so anyway, getting back to this. Now, just mentioning this, here, there are some, there have been some things. This is still a work in progress. Keeping in mind, I am in Northern California. I'm not seeing much productive going on in Washington or from my viewpoint. There's they've tried to put some other bills through. Nothing's going through right now, and my next statement would probably be offensive. So anyway, here, but there are some changes going on. Let me go through at least one or two scenarios, and then I'm sure you have questions here. So let me get these are real cases, okay? Jerry was injured at 25, has quadriplegia, and requires 24-hour care. Much of his care is through Medi-Cal and IHSS. IHSS is attended care. You know, once again, you go to when do you absolutely want to preserve the benefits? For somebody like Jerry who needs 24-hour care, that attended care, which is a pretty lousy program, but it's a foundation, is very valuable. You don't want to give that up. And a lot of what the trustee is going to do is probably supply attended care above and beyond that, but you want to have that covered. Okay, so we don't want to give it up. He has a personal injury settlement for $2 million, and his counsel is looking for the best way to set up the settlement. Now look at this from Jerry's standpoint. Jerry was probably a full functioning, you know, young man that had a great future ahead of him, and in the blink of an eye, he's disabled, right? And which could happen to any of us. So he's lost so much, and now he gets the $2,000. Now what, the $2 million, and you know his first question is going to be, how much money do I get? And the answer is zero, and he's excited about that, right? Not only has he lost control of his life and his assets and all that, he doesn't even get control of these funds. Most of the award is going to need to be placed in the self-settled trust because that's what we need to do, but he'd like to have some control over his life just for the hell of it. Here, without, by the way, without the trustee having to scrutinize every distribution, especially because we are in Region 9 here, where they are reviewing our trust like no other state, only in Region 9. And Region 9, our regions for Social Security are exactly the same as the federal court regions here. So, and so you have to account for everything. So everything, I mean, as a trustee, we learn things about our beneficiaries we probably don't really want to know. Here, we know what they purchase and all of that, and maybe Jerry would like to have a little autonomy. So all of the funds could be directed in the special needs trust, and the trustee could transfer some funds in the ABLE account. This would allow coordination. It would require some coordination here, and he couldn't compel the trustee to do that. Now the question comes up, could Jerry have some of the settlement funds structured and irrevocably assigned to the ABLE account? And that's what we did in this case. Now that did a couple of things when we did it, because one was we were on the verge of not closing this case. Now I understand where Jerry's coming from, okay? I mean, and God help me, I would never want to be one of my beneficiaries. I would not want to trade places with a single one of them. God bless them here. But, you know, in this case, it helped close the case because at least he was going to have $15,000 a year that he could do with it as he pleases. And his trustee isn't going to be going through, what did you use the funds for? For him, that was huge. Let me go through one more. Kramer has cerebral palsy, and his tremoring is reduced significantly by medical marijuana. As I said, we call it medicine, okay? By the way, we buy a lot of medicine, okay? I mean, now, are there problems with buying medicine? Oh, absolutely. Here. Kramer is about to get a large settlement, and the funds need to go in the special needs trust to maintain his eligibility. Newman, so I guess I'm Newman, the trustee is not comfortable paying for the marijuana. I don't care if he buys, I don't care what he does with the marijuana. But I'm not sure that I want to have my fingers on this if I can help it. And moreover, the purchase of medicine requires a cash transaction, which is like, so am I going down the dispensary with him and going, well, let's get some, I don't even know what they call this stuff anymore. I mean, I'm living in the 60s and 70s here. So how are we going to do that? Okay, so here's the thing that we looked at in this case. An ABLE account funded either with a structured settlement annuity or through trust transfers would allow Kramer to withdraw the cash for his medicine. Now the thing is medical marijuana a qualified disability expense? You know, we think it is. You know, the federal government isn't so sure. But you know what, the guidance we've gotten is they don't care. They just don't care. So here's the thing, because I've got 3 minutes and 39 seconds if I've got this right. going through this. There are a couple of other scenarios to look at. But let me just say a few things, and we can take a few questions. One thing is, we'll go back to this. If you either fill out the blue sheet here if you want to, or give my wife, Terry, your card, I'll send you a link, not only with a program here on the ABLE Act, but a bunch of very short videos that explain a lot of these concepts. Sometimes when you take them, most of you have not dealt with this before and tried to figure out how do you take all this stuff I ran past you in an hour and apply it. The nice thing with those videos is it really explains how you can use it, what are the things you should talk to about your clients about setting these things up, and why you may or may not want to tie it to a special needs trust. One of the reasons you might want to tie it to a special needs trust, there's a number of reasons. The housing thing, I mean, my goodness gracious, that is huge, okay? The other part of that is having some sort of autonomy. The other part of it is like, the reason my niece doesn't know how to manage money is she's never managed money. She's never purchased a thing for herself in her entire life. Could she learn to be financially aware? I think so. It's possible. A lot of these folks will achieve more than you ever expected, or they'll do something spectacular you'd never expected. But whatever it is, it's hard to predict what these folks are going to do. And so you can use it as a way of teaching independence. It is virtually, if you go back to the thing about the POMS where it says don't count it, whether it's for a housing expense or non-housing expense or whatever, here, it's virtually impossible to screw this thing up. You would have to work really hard here because it is monitored by the IRS, and Social Security came to the determination that this is not our problem, this is the Department of Treasury's problem. I suppose someday there'll be a case where somebody will get hit with a penalty. And actually, if you analyze the financial penalty for making the wrong distribution, it is laughable. It is absolutely laughable here. I mean, it just adds this whole different dimension. So we go back to this. This is a new tool. Whether you tie it to a special needs trust or you're working with other family members, this is something you might want to bone up on. And here's another thing. I live in an area that's considered saturated when it comes to special needs trust practitioners, okay? And, I do lots of programs on special needs trusts, and we do okay. I have been doing program after program after program on the ABLE Act, and I never say anything negative about it. I talk about my experiences with it. What has been the result? We have so much business, it is seriously a problem. And I am just telling you this. Because what is it? You get families in who want to hear about this. And if you give them honest information, they are probably going to come to the conclusion, especially if their child has capacity issues or if they want to use a larger amount of money or whatever, that, yeah, maybe this ABLE account is good, but what I need to do is tie that to a special needs trust, okay? And so I just want to tell you, just not only is this a new tool and a really cool tool, it is something that can help you build your practice. Last thing, if you do send something, part of this as the Golden State Pool Trust is we are actually invested in your practice. And so we actually give away information. Occasionally, you might refer a case to us. Whether you do or whether you don't, that's fine. But what part of what our board wants to do is raise the bar as far as planning for persons with disabilities to all the team. The attorneys, the financial advisors, the fiduciaries, and all that, and by doing that through CLE credit and bringing, possibly information to you you wouldn't normally get in another situation, we're going to raise the bar. Thank you very much. I think we're officially over, but you had a question, sir?
If you have a beneficiary who has capacity, are they able to change the person that has the signatory authority?
Yes, and the way they would change the person with the signature authority is through a power of attorney.
The power of attorney is not required to get the power of attorney.
No, they can change it at will.
Okay, you have a client, you should have a special needs trust on a neighbor trust. Where do you send them to set up an ABLE account?
The question is, where do you send them to set up an ABLE account? One of the things I'm going to send you is a video of a very impaired woman with cerebral palsy who types with one finger. She opens up an ABLE account in 9.5 minutes. I have been using the Ohio program. There are many other programs. The reason I've been using the Ohio program is whenever there's a problem, their customer service has been outstanding. I believe the Californians will be comparable, so you could move it to California later. But I have been using exclusively the Ohio program. I've had families try to use other programs, use Ohio.
And what institution is the money going?
I have no idea. It's somewhere in Ohio. So it'll be something, it'll be like a 529 plan administrator. You had a question, ma'am?
Yeah, so I have clients that are the trustees of their disabled son special needs trust, and they also have conservatorship over the estate, and they're really interested in the ABLE accounts.
Here's another reason why when you use an Ohio program. I just had this recently. Another program, which I won't mention, Nebraska, said that, oh no, you have to have you have to have an order and all these things. Ohio, conservator of the person, good enough for them, you're done.
They're thinking about, because the investments kick off a lot of income, and they are thinking they can use the ABLE accounts to avoid income taxes on the investments.
Well, you could conceivably, but you know where your issue is going to be, and it's going to take a while, and states or counties are coming on board, is like in Contra Costa County, my home county, they don't have a problem in the world with the conservator or a court-monitored trust having an ABLE account. Some counties don't.
Yeah,
It'll take a while.
That's another concern. Is this going to be, is it going to be under, it would be under court supervision, I believe, the ABLE account.
We think so.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any last questions? Or with that, thank you, and we are done, and we're heading to the beach.